Millionaire marries an obese woman as a bet, and is surprised when the chandeliers sparkled like falling diamonds, casting a golden glow over the elegant ballroom. Laughter, light-hearted and rich with indulgence, rippled through the air, mixing with the clinking of crystal glasses filled with the finest champagne. The opulence of New York's elite was on full display. Men in tailored suits and women adorned in gowns that shimmered under the lights. This was a world of power, wealth, and excess. And at the center of it all stood Lucas Marshall. Lucas was the type of man who commanded attention without asking for it. His presence was magnetic, his confidence unshakable. He was a self-made billionaire. A man who thrived on competition and had never once known defeat. Every business deal he touched turned into gold. And every woman he courted fell at his feet. To Lucas, life was a game, and he was always the winner. Tonight, he stood at the bar, sipping his whiskey with the ease of a man who owned the world. Around him, laughter and conversation swirled. But his focus remained on a familiar voice behind him, his longtime friend and rival, Jack Whitmore. Jack was leaning casually against the bar, an amused smirk playing on his lips. His eyes gleamed with mischief, the kind that meant trouble. "So, Lucas, tell me, is there anything you can't win?" Lucas turned to face him, his lips curling into a slow, knowing grin. "You already know the answer to that, Jack." Jack chuckled, swirling his drink thoughtfully. "See, that's where I disagree. I think you're only as good as the game you play. And I think you've been playing it too safe." He took a slow sip of his drink before leaning in slightly. "How about a real challenge?" Lucas raised a brow, intrigued. Jack always had a way of turning a casual night into something unpredictable. "I'm listening." Jack straightened, his smirk widening. "I bet you wouldn't have the guts to marry a woman who doesn't fit your usual type." There was a brief silence. Then Lucas let out a short laugh, tilting his head slightly. "That's it? That's your big challenge?" Jack's smirk remained, his gaze unyielding. "I'm not talking about just any woman. I'm talking about a woman you would never consider. Someone who doesn't fit the standard of beauty you always chase after." Lucas narrowed his eyes slightly. "And what's the prize?" Jack raised his champagne glass in a mock toast. $1 million. But there's a catch. You have to marry her and stay married for 6 months. Lucas took a slow sip of his whiskey. Considering the offer, he had played many games in his life. But this was something new. His ego flared at the thought. Jack thought he couldn't do it? That he, Lucas Marshall, couldn't win a woman over, no matter who she was? The idea was absurd. A slow, confident smirk spread across his face. "You have yourself a deal." Jack let out a low laugh, shaking his head. "This is going to be interesting." It wasn't long before Jack handed over the details. The woman in question was Chloe Richards. Lucas didn't know much about her yet, but he had seen her once or twice at business events. Though he had never paid much attention. She was unlike the women he usually dated, those slender, polished models and socialites who fit seamlessly into his high-profile world. Chloe was different. She was strong-willed, confident, and undeniably intelligent. What intrigued him more than her appearance was the way she carried herself. She didn't seek approval, didn't crave attention. She walked into a room with purpose. And that, more than anything, made Lucas curious. A few days later, Lucas received a message from Jack. Chloe knows about the bet. Lucas frowned at the text. That wasn't the plan. He had assumed he would go in, charm her, and get her to agree to a marriage of convenience. If she already knew, that meant she had her own reasons for playing along. And that, Lucas thought, was something worth exploring. When the evening of their first meeting arrived, Lucas found himself standing outside an upscale restaurant, his curiosity growing. As soon as he stepped inside, he spotted her. Chloe Richards wasn't what he expected. She was seated at the table, her posture relaxed but assured, her deep brown eyes steady as they met his. She didn't flinch, didn't waver. Instead, she lifted her glass of wine and took a slow sip, as if she had been waiting for him all along. Lucas made his way to the table, his signature smirk in place. Chloe Richards. She set her glass down and met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Lucas Marshall. He extended a hand, testing her. To his surprise, her grip was firm, unwavering. It was a silent message. I'm not afraid of you. Lucas took a seat, intrigued more than ever. Shall we get straight to the point? Chloe leaned back, her lips curling into a slight smile. Let's. I know about the bet. I know why you're here. And I know exactly what kind of man you are. Lucas raised a brow, masking his surprise. And yet, you agreed to meet me. Chloe tilted her head slightly, her expression challenging. Let's just say I have my own reasons. You see, Lucas, 6 months may seem short, but a lot can change in that time. If you think you can manipulate or control me, you're mistaken. For the first time in a long time, Lucas Marshall felt something unexpected, uncertainty. He had come into this meeting assuming he was the one pulling the strings. But Chloe wasn't bending to his charm. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth or power. She was a challenge, and Lucas never backed down from a challenge. As their first meeting ended, Lucas walked away with a smirk on his lips and a question burning in his mind. Who exactly is playing who? One thing was certain, this wasn't going to be as easy as he thought. What happens next? Will Lucas succeed in winning Chloe over? Or is he walking into a game where the rules aren't in his favor? One thing is for sure, this is just the beginning. If you're hooked on this intriguing story of power, deception, and unexpected emotions, make sure to keep reading. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. Who do you think will win this game, Lucas or Chloe? Lucas Marshall sat in his luxury penthouse, sipping an aged whiskey as he reviewed the details of his latest challenge. The bet had been made in the heat of competition, but now that the reality of it was sinking in, he found himself intrigued rather than repulsed. Chloe Richards, strong-willed, independent, and nothing like the women he was used to. His usual type was the elite, the flawless, the ones who saw his wealth and influence as a prize to be won. Chloe, however, seemed completely uninterested in any of that. A few days after the bet was placed, Lucas received the full details about Chloe. She was a successful businesswoman in her own right, managing a community outreach program and advocating for social issues. She wasn't impressed by the world of power players and extravagant lifestyles that Lucas inhabited. That only made her more of a challenge. He told himself that he was only going through with this for the money and the thrill of winning. But deep down, a small part of him whispered that perhaps there was something more to it. Something he hadn't yet figured out. Their first meeting took place in an upscale restaurant. The kind of place where Lucas felt most at home. He had chosen the venue intentionally, believing that the grandeur of the setting would intimidate Chloe or at least make her feel out of place. But when she arrived, walking in with a confident stride, her head held high, Lucas was taken aback. She wasn't the least bit nervous. In fact, she looked right at home among the glistening chandeliers and the soft murmur of high society conversations. "You must be Lucas Marshall," she said, sliding into the seat opposite him without hesitation. "And you must be Chloe Richards," Lucas replied, extending a hand. She hesitated for only a moment before shaking it. A firm grip, steady and sure. No timid hesitation. "Let's not beat around the bush," Chloe began, leaning forward slightly. "I know about the bet." Lucas raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her directness. "And yet you still agreed to meet." Chloe shrugged. "I have my reasons." Lucas studied her, searching for some indication of what those reasons might be. She didn't need his money. She certainly didn't need his name. So why was she here? "I'm not naive, Lucas," she continued. 6 months may seem short, but a lot can change in that time. If you think you can manipulate me or control me, you're mistaken." Lucas smirked. He liked a challenge. This was going to be more interesting than he thought. The evening progressed with an unexpected ease. Despite the underlying tension of the bet, their conversation flowed naturally. Chloe wasn't one to shy away from hard truths, and she challenged Lucas in ways no one ever had before. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or his power. She saw through his arrogance and met it with her own brand of confidence. By the end of the night, Lucas found himself intrigued. This wasn't going to be as easy as he had thought. But that only made it more exciting. The next meeting was different. This time, Chloe chose the location, a small, cozy cafe tucked away from the bustling city streets. Lucas was used to polished marble floors and extravagant dining. But he agreed to meet her there. Curious about her world, when he arrived, Chloe was already there, sipping a cup of tea with a calm smile. There was no pretense, no extravagance, just a woman completely at ease in her own space. "I thought you preferred 5-star restaurants," Chloe teased as he sat down. Lucas smirked. "Sometimes it's good to break the routine." They talked for a while, covering topics from literature to travel. But Chloe quickly cut to the chase. "If we're really doing this, I want to make a few things clear," she said, setting her cup down. "I'm not interested in your money or your lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months. And I plan on walking away exactly the same as I entered." Lucas watched her, intrigued. She was completely serious. Unlike the women who typically surrounded him, she wasn't hoping for an upgrade in social status. She had her own strength, her own plans, and she wasn't about to let him change that. "So what do you want, Chloe?" he asked, genuinely curious. She smiled. "Freedom." Lucas tilted his head, watching her intently. "I want you to know that even though we're entering into this agreement, I won't be controlled by you." She continued, "I have my own life. And that's not going to change because of a temporary marriage." Lucas found himself admiring her resolve. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Most people bent to his will. But Chloe refused. It both frustrated and intrigued him. "Fine," he said finally. 6 months. After that, we go our separate ways." Chloe searched his expression, as if assessing whether he truly meant it. Then she nodded. "Deal." As they left the cafe, Lucas felt something stir within him, something unfamiliar. This wasn't just about a bet anymore. There was something about Chloe Richards that made him question everything he thought he knew. And for the first time in his life, Lucas Marshall wasn't sure if he was the one in control. As the days passed following their first official meeting, Ethan found himself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of Sophia. He had agreed to this unusual arrangement under the guise of a game. A bet that his ego refused to lose. However, there was something about Sophia that unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite place. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth, nor was she impressed by his charm. If anything, she seemed entirely indifferent to the power he wielded, which was something entirely foreign to him. Their second meeting was set at a quiet, unassuming cafe, an odd choice considering the opulent settings Ethan was used to. When he arrived, Sophia was already there, sipping tea as though she belonged to the place. She greeted him warmly, a stark contrast to the cold, measured interaction of their previous encounter. Ethan took a seat across from her, scanning the surroundings that felt miles away from his penthouse world. It was a modest cafe, filled with students buried in books, professionals taking a break from their chaotic lives, and elderly patrons sipping on their afternoon coffee. It was alive in a way that his sterile, extravagant world was not. Surprised? Sophia asked, setting her cup down. Her voice carried a hint of amusement. Not what I expected, Ethan admitted, leaning back, but I suppose that's becoming a pattern with you. Sophia chuckled, a genuine sound that made something in Ethan tighten. He didn't like how she made him feel unbalanced, uncertain of his usual tactics. Normally, his wealth and confidence were enough to win over any woman. Yet with Sophia, he had to dig deeper. Think beyond the usual charm he employed so effortlessly. They exchanged pleasantries, though Sophia remained as direct as ever. If we're really going through with this arrangement, we need to set some ground rules. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Ground rules? Yes. Sophia leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. I want you to understand something. This isn't a game for me. I have my own reasons for agreeing. And they have nothing to do with your bet. You can do whatever you need to feel like you're winning. But I won't be manipulated or controlled. Ethan regarded her carefully. And what are your reasons? Sophia hesitated, then shook her head. That's not important right now. What is important is that I want to make it clear. I won't be some trophy wife paraded around at events or molded into some ideal version of what you think a partner should be. I'll be me. And if you can't handle that, you might as well back out now. Ethan stared at her, a slow smirk forming. You're quite something, Sophia. She merely lifted her cup again, unfazed by his comment. I know. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something stir within him that had nothing to do with conquest or power. It was intrigue, deep and consuming, and for the first time, he questioned if he was playing a game he had already lost before it even truly began. If you're enjoying the journey of Ethan and Sophia, stay tuned for the next chapter as their dynamic evolves. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to follow their unexpected path, because sometimes, the most unexpected challenges lead to the most profound transformations. The wedding was nothing more than a calculated formality, devoid of romance or genuine excitement. Ethan had ensured that everything was orchestrated perfectly, down to the last detail. The venue was grand, decorated with the most expensive floral arrangements money could buy. The guest list was filled with business magnates, celebrities, and high society elites, all gathered to witness what they assumed was a power move by Ethan rather than a love story. Sophia, draped in an elegant yet understated gown, stood beside him with the same unwavering confidence she had shown since the beginning. To the outside world, they appeared as the perfect couple, he, the wealthy and charming entrepreneur, and she, the mysterious woman who had somehow captured his attention. But underneath it all, Sophia knew what this marriage truly was: a means to an end. After the ceremony, they arrived at Ethan's penthouse, a towering glass fortress that overlooked the city. The interior was immaculate, a testament to his impeccable taste and endless wealth. Sophia took in her surroundings with quiet observation, running her fingers lightly over the smooth marble countertops, the sleek leather furniture, and the perfectly arranged art pieces. Ethan watched her from across the room, waiting for some kind of reaction. He expected awe, admiration, maybe even intimidation. Instead, Sophia simply turned to him with a small smile. 6 months. Ethan, not a day more. Her words unsettled him in a way he didn't expect. He had assumed that, with time, she would eventually succumb to the life of luxury he was offering. That she would soften under the weight of his world. But as the days passed, he quickly realized that Sophia was unlike any woman he had ever encountered. She didn't fawn over the expensive jewelry he left in their bedroom. She didn't care for the designer clothes or the lavish trips he arranged on a whim. While other women had once fought for his attention, Sophia seemed indifferent, content to live her life within the confines of their temporary arrangement. Ethan tried to maintain control, to manipulate the situation in his favor. He altered her schedule, subtly rearranged her commitments, and inserted himself into her daily routine in ways that forced her to engage with him. But Sophia met each attempt with a quiet resistance, neither aggressive nor submissive, simply firm in her own autonomy. As the days turned into weeks, the dynamic between them became a battle of wills. Sophia refused to let him dictate her life, and Ethan refused to let her remain unaffected by him. He found himself drawn to her in ways that had nothing to do with the bet. And that frustrated him. For once in his life, he couldn't predict the outcome. And that left him feeling vulnerable in a way he wasn't used to. One evening, after yet another attempt to impress her with extravagant gifts, Ethan finally confronted her. "Why won't you let me in?" he asked, frustration lacing his voice. Sophia looked up from her book, her expression unreadable. "Because you don't actually want me, Ethan. You want to win. And I'm not a prize." Her words struck deeper than he cared to admit. He had spent his entire life chasing success, proving himself, winning every challenge that came his way. But for the first time, he wondered if this was a battle he truly wanted to win, or if he was fighting for something far more meaningful than he had ever realized. The tension between Ethan and Sophia continued to mount as the weeks passed. Each interaction between them felt like a delicate dance, a game of chess where neither was willing to surrender control. Ethan had never been one to tolerate defiance, yet Sophia's quiet resistance intrigued him in a way he couldn't explain. The more she held her ground, the more he found himself drawn to her, captivated by the challenge she presented. One evening, Ethan returned home from a particularly grueling business meeting to find Sophia in the living room, seated on the plush couch with a cup of tea in hand. She barely acknowledged his presence, her focus entirely on the book in her lap. The sight of her, so composed and unaffected, irritated him more than he cared to admit. "You know, most women in your position would be making the most of this arrangement," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Sophia didn't look up. "Most women in my position aren't me." Her words, spoken so calmly, sent a strange rush of frustration and admiration through him. He had spent his entire life bending people to his will. But Sophia was different. No matter what he did, she refused to be anything other than herself. Determined to break through her walls, Ethan started accompanying her to the places she frequented. He followed her to the art gallery she visited every Sunday, to the quiet bookstore on the corner where she spent hours browsing through novels, to the park where she sat on a bench and watched the world pass by. At first, she regarded his presence as a mere nuisance. But over time, something changed. The hostility between them softened into something else, something neither of them could quite define. One night, they attended a charity gala together, an event Ethan had insisted she accompany him to. Dressed in an elegant emerald gown, Sophia exuded an effortless grace that left even the most seasoned socialites envious. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. As they moved through the crowd, engaging in small talk with influential figures, he found himself captivated by her poise, the way she held her own in conversations, the way she challenged those who underestimated her. By the time they returned home, the air between them was charged with an unspoken tension. As Sophia made her way to her bedroom, Ethan caught her wrist gently. Stopping her, she turned to him, her gaze questioning. "You surprise me," he admitted, his voice lower than usual. She studied him for a long moment before responding. "You don't know me, Ethan." He released her hand, watching as she disappeared into her room, leaving him alone with thoughts he couldn't quite process. He had entered this marriage expecting compliance, expecting control. Instead, he had met his match. The realization unsettled him. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't sure if he was the one pulling the strings anymore. If you're intrigued by Ethan and Sophia's evolving dynamic, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to follow their journey, because sometimes the strongest connections are forged in the most unexpected ways. Ethan found himself growing more restless as the days went by. His attempts to understand Sophia had shifted from casual curiosity to something deeper, something unsettling. He had spent his entire life calculating every move, planning each decision with precision. Yet Sophia defied logic. She was a paradox, gentle yet strong, reserved yet unshakable. The more he tried to mold her into the role he expected, the more she proved she would not be controlled. One evening, Ethan came home to find Sophia standing by the massive floor-to-ceiling window in the penthouse, her arms wrapped around herself. The city lights reflected in her eyes, casting a glow that made her seem even more untouchable. He hesitated before approaching her. "Something on your mind?" he asked, keeping his voice even. Sophia turned slightly, her gaze thoughtful. "Do you ever feel trapped, Ethan?" Her question caught him off guard. He frowned, taken aback. "Trapped? I have everything I could ever want. Why would I feel trapped?" She smiled, but there was a sadness behind it. That's what I thought too, she said softly, until I realized that sometimes the things we think give us freedom are the same things that chain us. Ethan didn't have a response to that. He had spent years building his empire, ensuring he was always in control. But in that moment, watching Sophia, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was speaking a truth he had never dared to consider. The tension between them continued to shift in subtle ways. Ethan found himself gravitating toward Sophia's presence, seeking out her company in ways he hadn't anticipated. They would sit in the same room, speaking about nothing and everything, sharing quiet moments that felt more intimate than anything physical. It unnerved him, this growing need to be near her, to understand her. One evening, after yet another business deal that left him more drained than satisfied, Ethan found Sophia on the balcony. The wind tugged at her hair, and she didn't turn as he stepped beside her. "I don't understand you," he admitted, his voice unusually raw. Sophia exhaled slowly, tilting her head toward him. "You don't have to. But if you really want to, stop trying to change me." Something about the way she said it struck Ethan deep. He had always been the one in control, the one dictating the rules. Yet Sophia stood beside him, unyielding, refusing to be reshaped by his expectations. And for the first time in his life, Ethan wondered if control was the very thing keeping him from what he truly wanted. If you're captivated by the growing tension between Ethan and Sophia, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to follow their journey, because sometimes the greatest battles are fought within ourselves. Ethan found himself growing more restless as the days went by. His attempts to understand Sophia had shifted from casual curiosity to something deeper, something unsettling. He had spent his entire life calculating every move, planning each decision with precision. Yet Sophia defied logic. She was a paradox, gentle yet strong, reserved yet unshakable. The more he tried to mold her into the role he expected, the more she proved she would not be controlled. One evening, Ethan came home to find Sophia standing by the massive floor-to-ceiling window in the penthouse, her arms wrapped around herself. The city lights reflected in her eyes, casting a glow that made her seem even more untouchable. He hesitated before approaching her. "Something on your mind?" he asked, keeping his voice even. Sophia turned slightly, her gaze thoughtful. "Do you ever feel trapped, Ethan?" Her question caught him off guard. He frowned, taken aback. "Trapped? I have everything I could ever want. Why would I feel trapped?" She smiled, but there was a sadness behind it. "That's what I thought too," she said softly, until I realized that sometimes the things we think give us freedom are the same things that chain us. Ethan didn't have a response to that. He had spent years building his empire, ensuring he was always in control. But in that moment, watching Sophia, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was speaking a truth he had never dared to consider. The tension between them continued to shift in subtle ways. Ethan found himself gravitating toward Sophia's presence, seeking out her company in ways he hadn't anticipated. They would sit in the same room, speaking about nothing and everything, sharing quiet moments that felt more intimate than anything physical. It unnerved him, this growing need to be near her, to understand her. One evening, after yet another business deal that left him more drained than satisfied, Ethan found Sophia on the balcony. The wind tugged at her hair, and she didn't turn as he stepped beside her. "I don't understand you," he admitted, his voice unusually raw. Sophia exhaled slowly, tilting her head toward him. You don't have to. But if you really want to, stop trying to change me. Something about the way she said it struck Ethan deep. He had always been the one in control, the one dictating the rules. Yet Sophia stood beside him, unyielding, refusing to be reshaped by his expectations. And for the first time in his life, Ethan wondered if control was the very thing keeping him from what he truly wanted. As their relationship continued to evolve, Ethan found himself battling emotions he never expected to feel. He, the man who had spent his life mastering the art of detachment, now found himself drawn into Sophia's world. The walls he had carefully built around his heart were slowly crumbling. But fear still lurked beneath the surface. Sophia, on the other hand, remained an enigma. She was kind, patient, but guarded. She never let him too close, always maintaining a careful distance. He could see the flicker of something in her eyes, pain, longing, perhaps even regret. It only made him more determined to uncover what lay beneath. One afternoon, they attended a high-profile charity gala, a setting Ethan usually thrived in. Yet, as he watched Sophia move through the crowd, effortlessly charming those around her, he realized something unsettling. He was jealous. Not because she was attracting attention, but because she seemed so at ease without him. For the first time, Ethan felt powerless in his own world. Later that night, after the event, he confronted her. You keep me at arm's length. Sophia. Why? She looked at him, the usual confidence in her gaze replaced by something softer. Because I know what men like you do when they get too close to something they don't understand. Her words stung, but Ethan knew she was right. He had spent years pushing people away, controlling every aspect of his life. But now, standing before Sophia, he realized he didn't want to push her away. He wanted to hold on, even if it meant facing his own weaknesses. I don't want to control you, he admitted, surprising even himself. I just don't want to lose whatever this is. Sophia studied him for a long moment before stepping closer. Then stop trying to win. This isn't a game, Ethan. It never was. As she walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts, Ethan finally understood. This was no longer about a bet. No longer about control. It was about something deeper. Something real. And for the first time in his life, he was willing to risk everything for it. If you're captivated by the evolving dynamic between Ethan and Sophia, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to follow their journey, because sometimes the hardest battle is learning to let go. Ethan had never been a man to let emotions dictate his actions. But as time passed, he found himself unable to deny the way Sophia had woven herself into his thoughts. The battle within him was one of pride versus a growing sense of admiration he never expected to feel. The bet had once seemed like an easy win. But now, it was anything but simple. Each day spent with Sophia tested his willpower, forcing him to question his own motives and the hollow nature of his past relationships. Sophia remained as independent as ever, refusing to be a pawn in anyone's game, least of all Ethan's. She carried herself with grace, but he could see the weight of past pain in her eyes. The more he tried to push her, to make her yield to his influence, the more he found himself losing ground. And it terrified him, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to understand. The money no longer mattered. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to admit what did. One evening, they attended a gala together. It was a world Ethan had always thrived in, surrounded by the city's most powerful and wealthy figures. Yet, standing next to Sophia, he realized that the glitz and glamour felt emptier than ever. He watched as she navigated the room with confidence, effortlessly charming people without pretense. It was a stark contrast to the way he had always moved through these spaces, calculating, strategic, never genuine. As the night progressed, an old friend of Ethan's, Damien, approached with a smirk. "So, this is the woman you're wasting your time on?" he asked. His tone laced with mockery. "Didn't think you'd actually follow through on that ridiculous bet." Ethan felt his jaw tighten, his blood running cold. He had never thought about how the people in his world viewed Sophia, how they saw her as an amusement, a game. He glanced at Sophia, expecting anger, maybe hurt, but instead, she met Damien's gaze with an unwavering stare. "Funny," she said, tilting her head slightly. "I didn't realize being independent and confident made me a waste of time. But then again, I suppose people who measure worth in numbers wouldn't understand." Damien scoffed, but before he could respond, Ethan stepped between them. "You don't know anything about her," he said coldly, "and maybe that's why you'll never have what she does." The words shocked even himself. He wasn't sure why he had said them, only that they felt true. And as Damien walked away, muttering under his breath, Ethan turned back to Sophia, whose expression was unreadable. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Because I wanted to," Ethan admitted. "Because for the first time, I think I actually care about something real." Sophia exhaled softly, searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. And in that moment, Ethan realized he had never been more sincere in his life. The night continued, but something between them had shifted. The walls Ethan had built so carefully over the years were beginning to crumble. And Sophia was the one tearing them down, not by force, but simply by being who she was. And deep down, Ethan knew he was no longer in control of this game. He had already lost, but for the first time, losing didn't feel like a failure. What do you think will happen next? Will Ethan fully realize what Sophia means to him before it's too late? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for the next chapter of this story. Lucas stood at the edge of his penthouse balcony, the city lights twinkling like tiny diamonds in the vast darkness before him. The weight of everything that had happened in the past few months was finally settling on his shoulders. He had started this journey as a man convinced he had control over every aspect of his life. But Chloe had shattered that illusion. She had turned his world upside down, forcing him to confront the darkest parts of himself, the arrogance, the selfishness, the reckless disregard for the lives he had impacted. Now, he was faced with the ultimate question: could he truly change? Or was he destined to live with the consequences of his past mistakes forever? The days following Chloe's revelation had been filled with an unbearable silence. She still lived under his roof, but their interactions were minimal. Lucas knew he had broken her trust beyond repair, and he didn't know how to fix it. He had spent his entire life believing that money and power could solve any problem. But this was different. Chloe didn't want his money, his status, or his influence. She wanted something he wasn't sure he was capable of giving: true remorse, real change, and a sincere effort to make amends. Lucas threw himself into trying to prove he was different, even if it felt impossible. He donated millions to charities that helped struggling businesses. He reached out to people he had wronged in his ruthless climb to the top. And he even started therapy to confront his deep-seated issues. But no matter what he did, Chloe remained distant, her walls fortified against his attempts at redemption. And who could blame her? He had entered her life on a cruel bet, treating her like a game to be won. How could she ever believe he truly cared for her now? One evening, as Lucas returned home after a long day of trying to right his wrongs, he found Chloe sitting in the dimly lit living room, a suitcase beside her, his heart clenched at the sight. "You're leaving," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Chloe nodded, standing up. "Yes." Lucas swallowed hard. "Is there anything I can say to make you stay?" She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Lucas, you've done a lot to show that you're trying to change. But I need to do what's right for me. And right now, that means walking away." He felt the sting of her words like a knife to the chest. He wanted to beg her to stay, to tell her he would do anything. But deep down, he knew he had to let her go. He had to prove that his change wasn't about keeping her, it was about becoming a better man. Whether she was by his side or not. "I understand," he finally said, "but if you ever change your mind, if you ever need anything, I'll be here." Chloe gave him a small, sad smile. "Goodbye, Lucas." And just like that, she was gone. The months that followed were some of the hardest of Lucas's life. He had to learn how to live without her, how to continue his journey of redemption without the hope that Chloe would one day forgive him. But he didn't stop. He kept working, kept rebuilding, kept proving to himself and the world that he could be a better person. He no longer did it for her, he did it for himself. Then, one day, as he walked through the bustling streets of New York, lost in thought, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Lucas." He turned, his heart stopping in his chest. Chloe stood there, looking more radiant than he had ever seen her. There was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a glimmer of something that made his breath hitch in his throat. "I heard about everything you've been doing," she said, "and I wanted to see for myself if you were really the man you said you wanted to become." Lucas held his breath. "And?" She smiled. A real, genuine smile. "I think I'd like to find out." For the first time in a long time, Lucas felt hope. And this time, it wasn't about winning a bet. It was about winning back the one thing he had never truly understood before: love. Lucas stood at the threshold of a new beginning, the weight of his past still pressing down on him. But no longer as an unbearable burden, it was now a lesson. A reminder of the man he once was and the man he aspired to become. Chloe had given him a chance. Not of redemption alone, but of transformation, and he was determined to prove that this second chance would not go to waste. As the days passed, their relationship took on a new shape, one built not on contracts or manipulations, but on mutual understanding, patience, and the slow rebuilding of trust. Lucas knew that love couldn't be demanded or bought. It had to be earned, step by step, through actions rather than words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the city in soft hues of pink and gold, Lucas found Chloe on the balcony, a warm cup of tea in her hands. He approached her cautiously, respecting the boundaries she had set. But this time, there was no tension, no wall between them. "I was thinking," Lucas started, his voice hesitant yet steady. "Maybe we could take a trip somewhere, just the two of us. No expectations, no pressure, just to see where we stand, to enjoy each other's company." Chloe turned to him, her gaze searching his face for sincerity. She had seen the effort he put in over the past months. The genuine steps he took to not only change but to grow into someone better. After a pause, she gave a small nod. "I think I'd like that." The trip wasn't extravagant or opulent. Lucas had learned that grand gestures weren't the key to Chloe's heart. They went to a quiet coastal town, staying in a small yet cozy inn where they could walk along the beach, share conversations over simple meals, and slowly, piece by piece, find the connection that had eluded them before. It was during these days that Lucas truly saw the woman Chloe was, not just someone he admired, but someone he wanted to cherish for the rest of his life. One evening, as they sat by a bonfire, Chloe looked at him and said, "I never thought I'd feel this way about you." Lucas swallowed hard, his heart racing. "And how do you feel?" She smiled, softer than he had ever seen. "Hopeful." It was the word he had been yearning for. Hope. It meant there was a future for them. A real one, not just a temporary arrangement. He reached for her hand. And this time, she didn't pull away. Months later, Lucas made another bold move, not for a bet, not for a game, but for love. He took Chloe to the place where it all began. The small cafe where they had their first real conversation. This time, however, there was no tension, no contract hanging between them. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to ask you anyway," Lucas said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. "Chloe, will you marry me, for real this time?" Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. Not out of sorrow, but out of the overwhelming emotion of the journey they had taken together. She had never expected to love Lucas. Never thought she could forgive him. But here they were, standing on the edge of a future she wanted to step into. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the city. Lucas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a deep embrace. They had come full circle. And this time, it was real. The wedding was small and intimate, attended only by close friends and family. There were no bets, no ulterior motives. Just two people who had weathered a storm and emerged stronger together. As Lucas and Chloe exchanged vows, there was a collective feeling of closure, of a chapter ending and another beginning. The once arrogant millionaire had found his greatest fortune, not in wealth, but in love, in the woman who had challenged him, changed him, and ultimately chose to be by his side. As the guests cheered and celebrated their union, Lucas pulled Chloe into a slow dance. "Thank you for giving me a chance to prove myself," he whispered in her ear. She smiled against his shoulder. "Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be." And with that, they stepped forward together, ready to embrace whatever the future held for them. What do you think of Lucas and Chloe's journey? Did Chloe make the right choice in giving him a second chance? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you loved their story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one.